In the cold, quiet streets of Amsterdam, a young woman with striking red hair steps out from the shadows. The dim streetlight catches her eyes, calm, focused, dangerous. A German SS officer approaches, amused, unaware he has already stepped into a trap. She smiles softly. A heartbeat passes. Then a single gunshot tears through the night. This is not a legend. This is the true story of Hannie Schaft, the girl with the red hair feared by the Nazis. And she was not alone. Two sisters, Truus and Freddie Oversteegen, just teenagers, used their innocence as a weapon, luring enemy soldiers into the dark and never letting them return. History tried to hide their names. Tonight, we bring them back to life. When the German army marched into the Netherlands in May 1940, it happened with terrifying speed. 1 week. That was all it took for a peaceful country to fall under the shadow of the Nazi flag. The streets of Amsterdam and Haarlem changed overnight. Uniforms replaced familiar faces. Orders replaced conversations. Fear replaced trust. But history often forgets one thing. Revolutions don't always begin with soldiers. Sometimes, they begin with girls. This is where our story truly starts. A girl with red hair. Her name was Jeannetje Johanna Schaft, but the world would come to know her as Hannie. She was 20 when the war began. A diligent law student at the University of Amsterdam. Quiet, sharp-minded. A lover of books, justice, and quiet evenings with her parents in their modest home in Haarlem. Her most striking feature was her hair, bright, unmistakable red. The kind of color you'd recognize even in the dark. Before the war, she had a simple dream: study, graduate, become a lawyer for the powerless. But wars steal dreams. And the Nazi occupation stole hers. New rules were announced. Curfews, identification papers, restrictions for Jews. Some of Hannie's closest friends were Jewish. Suddenly, they were forced out of public places, then out of schools, then out of their own lives. Hannie watched classmates disappear one by one, not because they moved, but because they were taken. This was the moment her heart began to harden. Slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. A soft voice inside her whispered, "If I do nothing, I become part of this." And Hannie Schaft was not the kind of girl who did nothing. Two sisters from the shadows. While Hannie was studying laws and loopholes, two sisters across town were learning something very different. Truus Oversteegen, 16. Tall, artistic, calm, like a still lake. Freddie Oversteegen, 14. Shorter, cheerful, baby-faced. The last person anyone would think capable of violence. They grew up in a poor but fiercely moral household. Their mother, a woman of steel tucked inside a soft voice, sheltered refugees and union organizers long before the Nazis arrived. To be an Oversteegen meant one thing: you stand against injustice, even if it costs you everything. When the occupation began, resistance groups needed couriers, messengers, and girls who could ride bicycles faster than fear itself. The sisters were recruited early. Their tasks were simple at first: hand out illegal pamphlets, distribute warnings, scout enemy movements. But the war was evolving, and so were they. The Netherlands didn't need children. It needed fighters. And the sisters were ready to become exactly that. 3 paths converge. Resistance work in the Netherlands was fragmented. Small groups, hidden cells. Sometimes they never knew each other's names. But destiny has a way of pulling the right people together, especially in dark times. Through a network of underground contacts, Hannie crossed paths with the Oversteegen sisters in the summer of 1943. The older members of the resistance had one reaction: surprise. 3 girls, the youngest, barely 15, volunteering for missions that grown men refused. At first, Hannie only carried documents and transported secret materials on her bicycle, her red hair tucked under a scarf. The sisters, meanwhile, were performing sabotage missions, cutting phone lines, destroying bridges, helping hide Jewish children and political prisoners. But the war escalated. Deportations increased. Raids became more brutal. And the Nazis grew more paranoid. The resistance needed volunteers for something far more dangerous: targeted assassinations. And here is the secret that shocked even hardened fighters. The ones most willing were the girls. Not because they were cruel, but because they believed something simple: if no one stops evil, it grows. The first kill. It happened on a rainy afternoon. A test of courage. A test of morality. The target was a Dutch collaborator, someone who betrayed his own people to serve the Nazis. Hannie went as backup. The Oversteegen sisters were the primary operatives. Freddie later recalled, "I was small. People saw me as a child. That made me invisible." The plan was basic. The man walked home alone each day, along a narrow forest path. Freddie would distract him. Truus would fire the shot. As the man approached, Freddie stepped out from behind a tree, pretending to ask for directions. The man smiled condescending, assuming she was harmless. A fatal assumption. In the next second, a gunshot echoed through the woods. Then silence. Freddie froze. Her hands trembled. Her breath shook. She had not pulled the trigger, but she had delivered a man to death. At 14, Truus grabbed her hand. "We did what we had to do," she whispered. "Don't look back." It was their first mission. It would never leave them. Fire inside Hannie. Hannie witnessed the aftermath. The body. The blood. The finality. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Not because she was numb, but because she understood something the war was teaching them all. Justice wasn't a courtroom anymore. Justice had moved to the shadows. Weeks later, Hannie herself volunteered for her first lethal mission. Her transformation had begun. The cheerful law student was fading. In her place, a new figure emerged. Focused, silent, uncompromising. A young woman whose hair burned like a warning. A flame in a city drowning in night. The streets changed their souls. Amsterdam in 1943 was a city split in two. By daylight, trams, bicycles, cafes, pretending to be normal. By night, arrests, boots on cobblestones, whispered warnings, and doors kicked in. Hannie, Truus, and Freddie rode their bicycles through both worlds. Sometimes with coded messages hidden in handlebars. Sometimes with weapons hidden under coats. Sometimes with fear pulsing through their bodies, but never enough to stop them. Every mission carved away a piece of innocence. The streets were their battlefield. Their bicycles were their escape vehicles. And their smiles, especially the sisters, became weapons more effective than guns. A German soldier seeing two teenage girls walking alone rarely suspected danger. But he should have. Because these girls did not run from danger. They hunted it. The birth of the trio. With each operation, the bond between Hannie, Truus, and Freddie deepened. Truus became the strategist. Practical. Level-headed. The one who asked, "How do we do this without getting killed?" Freddie became the decoy. Charming. Innocent-looking. The one who asked, "How do we make them trust us?" Hannie became the executioner. Precise. Cold when she needed to be. The one who asked, "Who deserves to be stopped?" Together, they were unstoppable. Too young to be suspected. Too brave to back down. Too driven to care about danger. Their names began circulating among the underground. Whispers of the girls spread from city to city. Some praised them. Some feared for them. But all agreed. They were essential. The Dutch resistance now had a weapon the Nazis didn't expect. 3 teenage girls who didn't miss. A new kind of war. War is not loud every day. Sometimes it is quiet, creeping, slow, psychological. The girls faced moments of terror they never spoke about afterward: evading patrols, lying to German officers, passing checkpoints with forged papers slick with sweat. They learned to control their breath, their heartbeat, their expressions. One wrong blink could mean arrest. One shaky word could mean torture. One mistake could expose their entire network. Yet they kept going, because each day they saw the trains, the transports, the families torn apart. The war didn't allow them to remain children, but it allowed them to become heroes. The turning point. By late 1943, the Germans began hearing rumors, reports from soldiers, fragments of testimony, inconsistencies. A troubling pattern appeared. Young men, collaborators, and officers were being killed after being seen with girls, teenage girls. One name surfaced more than any other. One description repeated, like a curse whispered in fear: the red-haired girl, Hannie Schaft. It wasn't long before the Nazi intelligence units started searching for her specifically. Her friends warned her. Her parents begged her to stop. But Hannie only said, "If I quit now, what was the point of starting?" Her path forward was set. There was no turning back. As winter approached, the resistance planned bolder missions. More dangerous, more critical. Hannie tightened her coat, hiding her red hair beneath a dark scarf. Truus cleaned her weapon with steady hands. Freddie practiced her innocent smile in a cracked mirror. They looked like ordinary girls, but history would remember them for something extraordinary. The streets of the Netherlands were about to witness what three young women could do when cornered by tyranny. By early 1944, the occupation had entered its darkest stage. Raids intensified. Executions multiplied. Every street corner felt watched, every shadow suspected. For most civilians, survival meant staying quiet. But for Hannie, Truus, and Freddie, silence was never an option. The resistance needed a new kind of operation, one that only the girls could carry out. And so began the chapter that would make them legends. The chapter the Nazis feared most. The method without a manual. The idea emerged within the Haarlem resistance group. Use what the enemy underestimates most: a woman's presence. Men in uniform saw girls as harmless decorations, objects of curiosity, distractions. The resistance saw an opportunity. A simple tactic, whispered through underground channels, soon became a signature move. Approach, distract, lead the target into a quiet place, and eliminate him. There was no training manual for this. No instructor. No rehearsal. Only courage, improvisation, and the ability to act without trembling. The first time Hannie tried it, she struggled to breathe. Not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to do. She was no longer just carrying messages or planting explosives. She was about to use herself, her posture, her smile, her voice, as a weapon. And once she did it, there would be no return to the person she was before. The walk into the alley. The target was a known collaborator, a man whose tips had led to multiple arrests. Hannie watched him leave a cafe late one evening, his laughter echoing in the cold air. She stepped forward, her scarf pulled tight against the wind. The man noticed her immediately. His eyes lingered longer than necessary. Exactly as predicted. "Do you have a light?" she asked softly. A simple line, harmless, disarming. He smiled proudly, as men often did when they believed a young woman needed something from them. They spoke briefly. Trivial words. Meaningless flirtation. Then, Hannie took a half step back, letting her gaze drift toward a quiet side street. The man followed. Always, they followed. Truus waited in the shadows. She held the gun steady, her breath measured. Hannie's heart pounded, but her face stayed calm. As the man stepped into the alley, she gave the smallest nod. A single shot. The echo disappeared into the winter air. The girls walked away separately, melting into the city's darkness. Later that night, Hannie sat alone. Her hands were steady. Her mind was not. She whispered to herself, "This is war. This is what war made of me." The girls weaponized innocence. For Truus and Hannie, the missions were heavy. For Freddie, they were surreal. She was just 15 when she played her first decoy role. Her youth was both her shield and her curse. She would skip into view, hair tied in ribbons, acting carefree. The soldiers softened instantly. Some flirted. Some joked. Some tried to impress her. They never imagined the girl inviting them for a walk was leading them toward death. Freddie later recalled, with a trembling voice even at old age, "They thought I was a child, but I knew exactly what I was doing. I had to pretend to be something I wasn't, to stop something far worse." The sisters developed their own rhythm. Freddie lured. Truus acted. Hannie finished. Their innocence became camouflage. Their smiles became traps. Their youth became the last thing many collaborators ever saw. The cost of killing. No resistance fighter, no matter how determined, escapes the psychological weight of taking a life. The girls carried it quietly. After each mission, the three would split up immediately, disappearing into the ordinary world, buying bread, riding bicycles, passing checkpoints with blank expressions. But once home, in the privacy of their rooms, they confronted their humanity again. Freddie would cry silently into her pillow. Truus would sketch lines in a notebook, trying to draw away her fear. Hannie would stare at her hands, wondering how they had transformed into instruments of war. None of them expressed regret, but all felt the weight. Hannie once murmured to Truus, "We kill to stop killers, but it doesn't make us clean." Truus replied, "Clean doesn't win wars. Courage does." The streets turned more dangerous. The success of their missions did not go unnoticed. German officers began investigating the pattern. They questioned soldiers, interviewed witnesses, tracked rumors. Descriptions of the assassins varied, but one detail appeared too often to ignore. A girl with red hair, Hannie's hair, her signature, her curse. To protect herself and the mission, she dyed it dark brown. But the legend of the red-haired assassin had already taken root. In taverns, soldiers whispered about her. Some laughed it off. Some mocked the idea. But others were afraid. The fact that the occupiers feared a young woman was a victory, but a dangerous one. The Germans began tightening surveillance. Checkpoints multiplied. Random searches increased. Resistance members disappeared. The girls had to adapt quickly. Hannie practiced new accents. Truus mapped escape routes through back alleys. Freddie learned how to hide her panic behind a perfect smile. But each night, they asked the same unspoken question. How much longer can we survive like this? The mission gone wrong. It happened on an evening that began like dozens before. The target was a high-ranking Dutch collaborator notorious for cruelty. The plan was straightforward. Freddie would approach him on her bicycle. Hannie and Truus would wait ahead. Once isolated, the trio would strike. But the man changed his route unexpectedly. He turned into a crowded street. And suddenly, nothing went as planned. Freddie panicked, swerving into a quieter side path. The man followed. But so did two German soldiers who happened to be nearby. Hannie and Truus froze behind a corner. Two soldiers meant two problems. Two guns aimed at the wrong moment could mean disaster. But Freddie improvised. She pretended to stumble. Her bicycle clattered loudly onto the pavement. The soldiers rushed to her aid. They saw a child in distress, not a resistance fighter buying precious seconds. While they checked on her, the intended target walked ahead alone. Hannie seized the moment. She stepped out, pulled the trigger, and sprinted away with Truus into the maze of alleys. When the soldiers turned around at the sound of the gunshot, Freddie was already crying. Convincing, terrified, innocent. They believed her completely. But that night, As the three reunited hours later, Freddie broke down. She whispered, "One day, they won't believe me. It was their first close call. It wouldn't be the last." Bonds forged in fear. The girls grew closer. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. They trusted no one else with their secrets, their fears, their nightmares. Each mission forced them to rely on one another more deeply than most people ever do in a lifetime. Truus often acted as the emotional anchor. She sensed when Hannie was too tense, when Freddie was cracking, when the trio needed to pause. Freddie brought humor, brief sparks of light in the suffocating darkness. Hannie brought strategy and precision, the cold edge necessary for survival. Together, they were not simply a team. They were a singular force, a silent weapon sharpened by desperation. When morality blurs, war bends the lines between right and wrong until they fracture. One evening, the resistance was ordered to assassinate a Dutch policeman. He enforced Nazi orders ruthlessly, but he had a wife, children, a home. The girls hesitated. Hannie asked the question they all feared. What if we kill someone who didn't deserve it? Their commander's answer was chilling. If we don't stop him, more people will die. We don't have the luxury to wait for perfect justice. The mission proceeded. The man died returning home from his shift. A bicycle bell rang. A signal in the dark. 2 shots followed. He collapsed in his own doorway. Freddie cried the entire night. Truus whispered, "This is war. No one leaves clean." The girls were changing, forced to see humanity not as individuals, but as threats, allies, or risks. A cold transformation, but not an evil one, a necessary one. Hannie's shadow grows longer. Hannie became more prominent in operations, more respected, more feared. She could memorize details instantly: faces, vehicles, patrol routes. Her precision made her essential. Her calm made her deadly, but it also made her a target. German intelligence pieced together fragments. A female assassin, possible student background, often near Haarlem, connected to several high-risk operations. They began hunting her specifically. One officer even issued a warning within his unit. If you see a young woman with red hair, proceed with caution. She may be armed. Hannie took this as motivation, not fear. She told the sisters, "If they fear me, we're doing something right." But deep down, she knew the net was tightening. Every mission from now on would require flawless execution. The turning point. It happened late one night in a dimly lit safe house. A radio crackled with coded messages. Truus decoded them slowly, brow furrowed. The Germans were planning mass arrests in Haarlem. Dozens of resistance members were at risk. Time was running out. The trio was ordered to deliver warnings across the city, fast, silently. And before dawn, they mounted their bicycles and vanished into the fog. Freddie delivered messages through cracks in doors, tapping code on windows. Truus spoke in whispers through cellar entrances. Hannie navigated the darkest corners, slipping past patrols with forged papers tucked beneath her coat. By sunrise, they had saved more people in one night than on any mission before, but the operation exposed them. Several collaborators spotted 3 girls on bicycles. Descriptions were passed to German intelligence. For the first time, Hannie voiced the fear they all shared. "We're visible now." Truus nodded. Freddie whispered, "They're coming for us." The girls returned to their ordinary lives by day, but the war had already marked them. Their innocence was gone, their faces hardened, their hearts sharpened. The streets of the Netherlands had become their silent battlefield, and beauty, their unexpected weapon. But dark winds were gathering. The Germans were closing in. The resistance was being infiltrated, and betrayal was approaching like a ticking clock. The legend of the red-haired girl was spreading. And soon, the Nazis would not just fear Hannie Schaft, they would hunt her. By early 1944, Hannie Schaft was no longer just a girl in the resistance. She was a rumor, a whisper passed between frightened soldiers, a ghost haunting the alleys of Haarlem and Amsterdam. They spoke of a young woman with red hair who killed without hesitation. Someone who appeared from nowhere and vanished before anyone could react. The Germans feared her. The collaborators feared her. Even some resistance members feared her resolve. But Hannie was not a ghost. She was flesh and blood. A 2-3-year-old student who had traded her textbooks for a pistol. And now, the Nazis were hunting her. She must disappear. Her red hair had become too dangerous. Every checkpoint, every patrol, every German description sheet, they all said the same thing. A young Dutch woman with red hair, highly dangerous. The resistance begged her to dye it. She resisted at first, not out of vanity, but out of identity. Her hair was who she was. It was part of the fire inside her. But when a collaborator recognized her on a tram, and she escaped only because of a crowd blocking him, she realized the truth. Red hair meant death. That night, Truus stood behind her with a bowl of dye. She mixed the dark brown pigment with trembling hands. Hannie sat silently in front of a cracked mirror. Truus whispered, "Are you ready?" Hannie closed her eyes. "No, but do it." When it was finished, the girl with the flaming hair was gone. In her place stood someone harder, colder, darker. Freddie said softly, "You don't look like yourself." Hannie replied, "I'm not myself anymore." The resistance shifts. The war was turning. The Allies were gaining ground. But the Germans were not retreating quietly. Their desperation made them brutal. Mass arrests, public executions, house-to-house searches, hostages shot in retaliation. The resistance had to adapt. They went deeper underground. Code names became mandatory. Safe houses rotated every week. Hannie's movements grew more restricted, more dangerous, more crucial. She began working directly with higher-level commanders, gathering intelligence, planning sabotage routes, communicating with cells across Haarlem. But every mission carried the same risk. If she was caught, she would not survive interrogation. She knew too much. Still, she refused to step back. Hannie's motto became, "Better to die standing than live under terror." Life with death at the door. Daily life became a ritual of deception. Forged papers tucked into her coat, a pistol hidden in her bicycle basket, a cyanide pill sewn into her dress hem. A final escape, if capture was inevitable. She learned to walk past German officers without blinking, to smile calmly when questioned, to breathe evenly when a soldier inspected her bag. Every second was a test. One mistake meant death, not just for her, but for Truus, Freddie, and the entire network. The trio began meeting less often. Too dangerous to be seen together. Too risky to draw patterns. They lived separate lives during the day, but their bond remained unbreakable. Freddie once asked Hannah, "Aren't you scared?" Hannie responded, "All the time. But fear is not my enemy. Fear is my compass." Love in the crossfire. In the midst of war, something unexpected happened. Hannie fell in love. His name was Jan Boonkamp, a young resistance fighter, known for his bravery and his absolute dedication to the cause. They worked together on missions, passed coded notes, shared stolen moments between curfews. Love in wartime is different. It grows faster, burns brighter, because tomorrow is never promised. Their connection was undeniable. They dreamed of a future, a life after the war, a world they could help rebuild. But the war had no mercy for lovers. One evening, Jan and Hannie were planning an assassination. She was supposed to act as backup. He insisted on leading the mission alone. Hannie protested. He kissed her hand and said, "If anything happens, promise me you'll keep fighting." It was the last time she saw him alive. Jan was shot during the mission, not fatally at first, But the Germans captured him. Before dying, he revealed Hannie's name under torture, likely involuntarily, in a moment of unbearable agony. His final words, reported by a German officer, were, "She will finish what I started." When Hannie heard this, she did not cry. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Then, I must." That moment solidified her transformation. She was no longer a student. She was a soldier. The net tightens. Jan's capture triggered an immediate manhunt. The Germans intensified surveillance. They set traps, used decoys, interrogated civilians at random. They circulated sketches of Hannie with brown hair. Her codename leaked. Her safe houses were compromised. But Hannie adapted. She changed routes daily, traveled at dawn, avoided familiar faces, destroyed every document after reading it. Still, danger crept closer. One day, while biking to meet a contact, she turned a corner and nearly collided with two German policemen. They stopped her, asked for her papers, scrutinized every detail. Her heartbeat roared in her ears, but her face remained calm. The officer studied the photo. Then, her face. Then the photo again. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, he waved her through. Hannie rode away slowly. But the moment she turned the corner, she broke into a sprint, tears in her eyes. She had brushed against death, and survived only because fate blinked. The mission that changed everything. It was supposed to be simple. A high-ranking collaborator. Well-known, heavily guarded, but predictable. The resistance planned the operation carefully, perhaps too carefully, because the Germans were using him as bait. Hannie and a comrade approached the target near a coastal road, but they didn't realize a German patrol was stationed nearby, waiting for anyone who dared attempt assassination. Hannie fired. The target fell. The echo of the gunshot traveled farther than they expected. Within seconds, soldiers swarmed the area. Hannie tried to escape on her bicycle, pumping the pedals with desperate force. But gravel slipped beneath the wheels. Her bike skidded. She crashed. Before she could rise, a German soldier grabbed her by the arm, forcing her face into the dirt. She reached instinctively for the cyanide pill, but in the chaos, the pill fell, lost in the sand. For the first time, Hannie Schaft was captured alive. Interrogation. They took her to a detention center near Haarlem. The moment she entered, several officers recognized her. One whispered, "Das ist sie." Die wrote, "That's her." The red one. Even with dyed hair, her reputation preceded her. The interrogations began immediately. They demanded names, safe houses, networks, supply lines. Hannie refused. Calmly, completely. She looked her interrogators in the eyes and said, "I will tell you nothing." So they beat her. Hard. Systematically. Repeatedly. Still, nothing. A guard later testified. "She took punishment like no man I've seen. She just stared at us, as if we were beneath her." But the Germans knew who she was. She was the symbol they needed to crush. Her file reached the desk of the Sicherheitsdienst, the Nazi intelligence service. One officer wrote, "High-priority prisoner. Extremely dangerous. Execute quietly." Truus and Freddie hear the news. News of Hannie's capture struck the resistance like a bullet. Truus received the message first. She dropped the note. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Freddie burst into tears. She refused to believe it. Refused to accept that Hannie, their fearless Hannie, could be gone. The resistance debated a rescue mission, but Hannie was held in a fortified prison, surrounded by soldiers, under constant watch. A rescue was suicide. Truus made the hardest decision of her life. "We cannot save her, but we can honor her," Freddie whispered. "She wouldn't want us to die trying." So they continued fighting, because stopping would make Hannie's suffering meaningless. Hannie's final morning. On the 17th of April, 1945. Just weeks before liberation, Hannie was taken from her cell. She was thin, bruised, but her eyes were steady. A guard escorted her to the dunes near Overveen, a place where many resistance fighters had been quietly executed. 2 soldiers stood ready, one young, one older. The commander read her sentence. Hannie did not flinch. The younger soldier raised his rifle, but his hands shook. He aimed, fired. The bullet grazed Hannie's temple. She staggered, but remained standing. She looked straight at him and said, "I shoot better." The commander, enraged, stepped forward. He fired the final shot into her head. Hannie Schaft fell into the sand. A silent warrior. A 4-year-old girl who fought an empire. What survives after death? Her body was buried in a shallow grave, unmarked, erased. Or so the Nazis hoped. But legends don't die easily. After liberation, her remains were found and reburied with honor. Thousands attended her funeral. The Queen spoke her name with reverence. She became a national symbol, not of violence, but of courage. Truus and Freddie lived long lives. They carried Hannie's memory everywhere. They told her story. They honored her sacrifices. They preserved the truth that a young woman with red hair terrified the most powerful army in Europe. Hannie Schaft's capture was not the end of resistance activity, but it marked the end of innocence, the end of belief that they were untouchable. Part 4 will tell the aftermath, the legacy, and the truth of what 3 girls did when the world fell into darkness. When Hannie Schaft collapsed on the cold sand of the Overveen dunes, the war didn't stop. The world didn't pause. The sky didn't open. It was just another morning in the final weeks of the German occupation. But her death carried a weight that even her executioners could not ignore. A silence followed, heavy, unnatural, enduring, as if the land itself understood that a great force had fallen. This is the story of what happened next. To the world, to the resistance, to the 2 sisters who survived, and to the legacy of a young woman whose courage refused to die. A rumor of a girl in the dunes. Word spread quietly at first. A guard whispered it to a kitchen worker. The kitchen worker shared it with a family member. The family member murmured it in a church basement used by the resistance. They executed a girl. Not a man. Not a soldier. A girl. The underground community froze when the details emerged. Young. A resistance fighter. Captured near Haarlem. Possibly the infamous red-haired girl. But hair dyed brown. Truus received the news in fragments. At first, disbelief. Then dread. Then the crushing truth. Hannie was gone. Freddie collapsed into her sister's arms, sobbing like the child she still was. Truus held her tightly, but her own strength was cracking. Sorrow filled the room, thick and suffocating. But grief had to be delayed. War did not give them time to mourn. The war ends without celebration. On May 5, 1945, just 3 weeks after Hannie's execution, the Netherlands was liberated. People rushed into the streets. Flags waved. Music played. Children danced. German soldiers surrendered their weapons and slunk away. But Truus and Freddie did not celebrate. Others rejoiced. They buried the pain of the occupation. They dreamed of peace, of normal days. But for the sisters, liberation was a reminder. Hannie never lived to see this. They felt the victory like a wound, not a triumph. That night, Freddie whispered, "Why her? Why so close to the end?" Truus answered slowly, "The Germans killed her because they feared her. Because, even at the end, she was still a threat, finding her again." On the 27th of May 1945, a group of resistance members carefully surveyed the dunes near Overveen, the known execution site. They carried notebooks, shovels, and a determination carved into their faces. Truus was there. She insisted on coming. She owed it to Hannie. The dunes were peaceful that day. Too peaceful. The wind whispered lightly over the tall grass, as if trying to guide them. One of the searchers stopped. He pointed at a patch of sand, disturbed slightly, as if someone had covered it in a hurry. They began to dig. Minutes later, a piece of fabric appeared. A sleeve. A hand. Truus fell to her knees, her breath breaking. They had found her. Hannie Schaft. The girl the Nazis couldn't break. The flame they tried to extinguish. The men placed their hats over their hearts. The wind went silent. Truus touched Hannie's cold hand and whispered, "We found you. We're taking you home." The funeral that became a nation's tribute. On the 27th of November 1945, Hannie Schaft was given a state funeral. The only woman resistance fighter to receive one. Thousands attended. Old men, young mothers, veterans, students, survivors. The Queen of the Netherlands sent representatives. Flags flew at half-mast. Her coffin, draped in flowers, was carried through the streets. She once rode her bicycle, but now without danger, without fear. Truus walked behind it, her face pale, but unshaken. Freddie walked beside her, clutching her sister's hand for strength. Hannie's mother collapsed into tears when the coffin passed. She had lost her only child. Her grief tore through the crowd like a blade. When the coffin was lowered, a priest spoke words that would echo through Dutch history. She died so that others could live without fear. Then, silence. A deep, collective silence. Not the silence of death, but the silence of respect. Life after war. The survivor's burden. The war ended, but the battle inside Truus and Freddie did not. Nightmares. Flashbacks. Sudden panic. The memories of faces before and after the gunshots. At times, Freddie would wake in the night, trembling, hearing footsteps that weren't there, seeing shadows move that belonged only to memory. Truus became a speaker, traveling across the country to warn future generations about the dangers of fascism and hatred. Some nights, she wept alone. Other nights, she felt Hannie walking beside her. Freddie tried to live quietly, a simple life, a family, a home, but the war lived beneath her skin. Veterans often say, the dead are at peace. It's the living who struggle. For the sisters who survived, every peaceful morning felt like borrowed time. Hannie's file. The truth behind the execution. After the war, the Dutch government gained access to Nazi records. Hannie's file shocked even hardened investigators. She was executed against orders. Berlin had instructed that female resistance prisoners be kept alive. They wanted to use them in propaganda, or as bargaining chips. But the Dutch Sicherheidsdienst commander in Haarlem had grown violently obsessed with capturing the red-haired girl. When she was finally found, he wanted her dead immediately, even if it meant disobeying his superiors. One note in her file read, "She was too dangerous to live, too intelligent to interrogate, too inspiring to keep alive." Her execution was not strategic. It was personal. They didn't kill Hannie Schaft because she was weak. They killed her because she was powerful. The world learns her name. After the war, Hannie became a symbol across Europe. Schools were named after her. Streets, foundations, memorials. Books were written, documentaries filmed, songs composed, poems dedicated. Her red hair, the very thing that endangered her, became a sign of courage. Children would ask their parents, "Who was the girl with red hair?" And parents would answer, "She was someone who refused to bow." Truus and Freddie spent decades telling her story, because they knew something vital. Heroes are forgotten if no one keeps their names alive. The weight of killing, what they finally admitted. Truus and Freddie rarely spoke about the details of their missions. Not publicly, not for decades. Only near the end of their lives did they admit the full truth. Taking a life even in enemies was a wound that never healed. Freddie said in a late interview. I was a child with a gun. People don't understand what that does to a soul. Truus added, we did what we had to do, but every shot stays with you. Forever. They insisted they were not heroes. Just ordinary girls forced into extraordinary choices. But history disagreed. The final reunion, in 2014, on the 70th anniversary of liberation, Freddie Oversteegen, by then an elderly woman with soft white hair, stood at Hannie's memorial. Her hands trembled. Her eyes glistened. She placed a bouquet of red flowers on the stone, the same color as Hannie's hair. She whispered, we made it, Hannie. We lived long enough to tell them who you were. A single tear slid down her cheek. It wasn't only grief. It was gratitude. For a friend who had carried her through the darkest nights. For a sister in arms whose bravery transformed a nation. Freddie died in 2018. Truus had passed earlier, in 2016. They lived full lives. But they never forgot the girl who never grew old. What remains today? Time has softened wounds, but not erased them. Today, school children learn about Hannie Schaft. They see her photographs, her steady gaze, her confident posture, her youth. They hear about the sisters, the teenagers who used bicycles and courage as weapons of liberation. Statues stand in their honor. Museums hold their artifacts, their bicycles, their forged papers, their mission maps. Their legacy is not the violence they committed. It is the courage they embodied. 3 girls changed the course of a nation, not because they were soldiers, but because they were human, in a time when humanity was forbidden. Ending. The red hair, the red flame. Hannie Schaft's story is not just one of resistance. It is a reminder. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is acting despite fear. She was 24. She was brilliant. She was stubborn. She was compassionate. She was unbreakable. And when the world demanded silence, she spoke with action. When tyranny demanded obedience, she fought with fire. When evil insisted on winning, she proved that even one young woman could shake an empire. Her flame did not die in the dunes. It lives everywhere. People choose bravery over comfort, justice over safety, and truth over fear. This was Hannie Schaft. This was Truus and Freddie Oversteegen. This was the power of women in war. And this will never be forgotten.